Hi, welcome. My name is Allie. I live in the northeastern United States in Vermont on Abenaki land. And this is going to be a video about my hand-knit wedding dress. If you have seen my videos before, you know that I usually make just videos about whatever projects I've been working on and sometimes my life living here and the fiber community here in Vermont. But today's episode is going to be a little bit different. This project I started in May-ish. I got married to my longtime partner, Chris, on October 6th, so a couple weeks ago. And I want to tell you all about it because it was a really interesting and fun process, and maybe you are interested. I will have lots of photos in this video, both photos that I have taken, and we just got the previews back from our photographer Lillian of Goldwing Photography, who was amazing. She chatted with me all about textiles and fibers, and that was amazing. And she just took gorgeous photographs, including the one that I used for the thumbnail for this video. So I'll definitely put her link below if you are in this area. She's just a wonderful wedding photographer. So there will be photos of the process, no video because I wasn't taking video while I was making it. The way that I'll organize this video, and I'm going to try to put in those little chapters, is that I will tell you a little bit about what Chris and I did for our wedding and sort of how I got the idea to make this garment. I will tell you about choosing the pattern. I'll tell you about choosing the yarn, making the garment, including the modifications that I made and parts that were difficult, how I styled it for our actual day of wedding, and then a couple tricks and tips for if you are going to make a garment for your own wedding, things that I either found helpful or that I wish I had done differently. So, without further ado, I'll tell you a little bit about our wedding. Chris and I knew that we weren't going to have a big ceremony. We thought we were going to maybe do something just with our immediate family, and then we decided that we wanted to have our vows exchanged, just the two of us, in this very special place called Chickering Bog here in Vermont. If you aren't familiar, a bog is a very special type of wetland that, because of the conditions in the ecosystem, often has very rare and beautiful plants. So it's a hike into this bog and then a hike out. And we decided that we were going to do just that with our photographer and then come back to our house where my dad would do the paperwork so that we were officially married. So vows and rings happened at the bog, paperwork at home. I originally thought that I would knit a shawl to wear for my wedding day, but when I was thinking about it and looking at dresses from stores, I couldn't find a type of dress from a store that would go well with a shawl that I thought I would like, and I wasn't feeling very excited about going dress shopping. And so I got to the point where I thought, I always feel the most confident and comfortable wearing an item of clothing that I've made. I think I just want to make my whole dress. And so I decided to do that in May. I went to go look for a pattern on Ravelry. It would have been very cool to self-draft a pattern, and I know that some people do that, but I was worried that I wouldn't have enough time, especially because I don't knit lace very often. And so I thought, I'm going to find a pattern that is close to what I'm thinking about, and then I can modify it if I need it to change. I looked at a lot of really beautiful photos on Ravelry. I searched for wedding dresses and dresses that people had just knit in white, but I did notice a couple things. One is that for a lot of the dresses, people wore belts, which makes sense because knitted fabric doesn't have very much structure, and to give it the form and maybe the silhouette that you want, a lot of people wore belts. Another is that a lot of the dresses had maybe only one lace pattern, and another is that a lot of them were knit in one piece. I knew that I wanted something with structure, that I wanted something that had different lace patterns to keep my interest, because I like to change it up a lot unless something is just plain stockinette. I like for things to be changing to keep my interest. I didn't want any lace that was too difficult, but I wanted it to change. And I also wanted something that was knit in pieces so that I could break it down into like more manageable chunks for myself. So I eventually found the Silvermine dress by Stephanie Close, and I thought, wow, this dress has a really nice knitted waistband, which you can see right here. Oh. A nice knitted waistband that gives a lot of structure. It's knit in a bunch of pieces, and it has many different simple lace patterns, and I thought, okay, this looks great, but I know that I'm going to want to change a couple things. One is that the original neckline was a scoop neck, which is not my deal, but I thought that might be easy to change. Two is that I wanted sleeves. And I knew that I wanted sleeves because we were getting married in October. I thought it would probably be cold. I also liked the idea of the tattoos on my arms poking out from underneath lace sleeves. Thought, okay, I can draft sleeves. This looks like a really close match in a lot of other ways. So this is the pattern that I chose. I want to say a couple things about this pattern before I go on. First of all, I think that it made a beautiful finished object. And I had gathered this from reading notes on other people's projects. There's a lot of mistakes in the pattern. It's not size inclusive. I knit the largest size, which was a 40-inch bust. I'm about a 41-inch bust, so I'm even a little bit bigger, but I made it work. I was reading about the author and I found an article, I think this is maybe true, where she just mentioned that she had given a pattern writer her notes, who then wrote up a pattern for other people and graded it. And there are just a lot of mistakes. There's a mistake in one of the lace charts. There's like frequently the numbers are wrong. You have to be able to edit things. And so while the lace itself is not that difficult, I think that this might be a pattern that might be better for a more advanced knitter, just because you have to be able to know like, okay, that's not right. I actually need to do it this way. It wasn't test knit, I don't believe, which makes sense because it's a huge time commitment to make a garment this big. But because of that, that's just the way that the pattern is. So it exists and you can buy it. If you decide to knit this lace dress, please reach out to me. YouTube is good, Ravelry is also good if you're able to use it. I'm not using Instagram as much these days. I don't check my messages on Instagram. I'm always happy to help you navigate any parts that might be confusing, because I do think that it's doable. I'm not I'm not used to having patterns where I'm frequently like, okay, like there's something to fix, because I usually knit patterns that have been test knit. So, you know, just a thing to be aware of. It's a really good base to work off of. So, after I had picked the pattern, was time to pick the yarn. My first choice for this yarn would have been to hand spin it, because I used thousands of yards. That was not doable in my time period. If I'd had a few years, that might have been a great project, but I knew that I was gonna have to purchase yarn. I really wanted to purchase a yarn that was local to me. Here in Vermont, we have tons of fabulous mills, such as the Junction Fiber Mill, who recently started selling yarn at the Woolly Thistle, and Green Mountain Spinnery, and just lots of local sheep farmers, but pretty much nobody makes a lace weight yarn, which makes sense. It's not a very common weight that people use. It's sort of specialized. I don't even know if it would be the best yarn, like if the wool that comes from this area would be the best wool for knitting lace, because I'm still pretty new to lace. So I couldn't find a local yarn. I found something that was close, which was a Julie Asselin, who does Nurtured. I can't remember the exact lace weight yarn. I will put it here. She does a gorgeous yarn. She's based out of Quebec, which is right to the north of where I live, and her yarns are milled at Green Mountain Spinnery. and I found one and I was like, this is it. This is close to local for me, but I couldn't find that lace weight yarn in a color that felt right. I originally wasn't going to do white. I wanted to do maybe like a cream or pink, but especially because I was buying yarn online, I wasn't sure if it would work with my skin tone, and I got nervous and I thought, okay, it'll probably be easier just to knit the dress in white. I'll know that it will go with my skin tone, and it will definitely read as wedding dress because it's a classic color. So the Julia Asselin yarn, it was out because nothing was even light enough that it would be close to this. And I did at that point sort of say, okay, I probably won't find a local yarn. What else can I look for since I don't knit lace very often? The yarn that Stephanie Close used, the pattern designer, I believe is called Jade Sapphire Sylph, and is gorgeous. It's 50% cashmere and 50% linen. And I looked at using that, but it's quite expensive. It was going to be like $300 to knit the dress. I, at that time, didn't know if this dress was going to work out or if I'd have to purchase a dress. I wasn't willing to invest that much money up front. And so I kind of kept looking for something that would be nice, luxurious, but not too expensive. And what I eventually landed on after looking all over Ravelry, looking at people's comments, looking at different projects, looking at photos to see stitch definition and twist, is this one. Let me grab it. This one, which is Shibui Knits Lunar in the colorway white. This yarn is 70% wool and 30% silk, and it is a beautiful, let's see, and it is a beautiful yarn. It is very light, lofty. It's a nice 2-ply, so it's not quite splitty. There were a couple times that it got a little fuzzy when I was like reworking something, but it's incredibly soft and drapey, and it ended up working perfectly for this project. I bought, I want to say 14 skeins from yarn.com, which is Webs, which was $140 because they have a discount, and I probably used about 11. So I think I probably put about $110 of yarn into this dress. When I ripped things out, I didn't frog and reuse the yarn because I had enough extra. Like I have at least a whole extra full skein. I think I have another almost full skein upstairs. So there were times that I knit things and I put them aside and didn't rip them out. So, you know, it's a nice yarn. It's 30% silk, and correction, it's 60% extra fine merino and 40% silk, which makes sense because it's very soft and lustrous. And the silk is mulberry silk, which I think is more sustainable. I checked out the company and it seemed like their practices were good. I've never knit with Shibui Knits before. If you know anything about them, I'm so happy to hear, but it seemed good quality. So this was the yarn that I went with. I will say that because this yarn is different than the yarn that Stephanie Close used, which was 50% cashmere and 50% linen, I wouldn't say I ran into problems, but I noticed that there were some differences. I think that the yarn that she used has more of a halo that fills in the gaps between areas. So she used US size 4. I used US size 2 for almost the whole dress. And I think that her yarn was actually a little bit thicker than typical lace weight as well. Like fewer wraps per inch maybe, or more weight per yard. So there were some differences, but this worked out pretty well. I would actually say it worked out really well. I would definitely knit with this again. Gorgeous. This was so comfortable to wear after it was blocked. Lovely. So yeah, let me tell you a little bit about how I made this dress. I took a lot of measurements and I knit some swatches. Here are two of my swatches. They might look really similar, but this one was knit on US size 3 and this one was knit on US size 2. So I got gauge with US size 3 needles, but the fabric was a little bit more open. And I actually had problems with this stitch pattern in particular, which is this one right here. The first one on the dress, where I didn't love that the yarn overs weren't super clear. And when I looked at the original dress, I just felt like it looked better than this, at least for this stitch pattern. And I think that had to do with the difference in the yarn. And I tried a lot of different things to get this stitch pattern to be like a little bit nicer. Like I had size US 1 needle on one hand and US 3 on the other. And I tried all of these things. And then I was like, this is too much effort. This is just one stitch pattern. Even if it doesn't read exactly how I want it to, I can just keep moving. And so I started knitting this in US size 3, and then I decided it was too big. And so I got pretty far, and then I put it aside and used my swatch for US size 2, realized I could still get gauge, and it was just, the fabric was a little bit tighter and a little bit neater. And then I knit this entire skirt on US size 2. And it's 2 pieces. The main part of the skirt is one piece, and then there's the center panel. And I did the main piece first since that was the largest part of the dress, and I thought it would be easiest to do the biggest part first. The only thing I really changed is that there are these 7-row tucks, and I had kind of looked at other people's projects and I switched it to a 5-row tuck. This is a technique where you're knitting back a couple rows to make sort of that line of fabric. I think Stephen West uses this. He calls it welts, but it makes these horizontal lines, and I think the 5-row tuck looked really nice. This took me, I think, till like the beginning of August. I worked on it almost every night while watching TV with Chris and our dog Darwin, and it just was time consuming, but it was fun. It was just like nice, straightforward knitting. You're only increasing every once in a while. I made some mistakes. I thought I was gonna use lifelines and I didn't. And so I fixed the mistakes as best I could and I kept going, because if I tried too hard to fix them, I knew that I wouldn't have the motivation to sort of finish the dress. So there are definitely a handful of mistakes that you could find. I think that because there's so much lace work, you tend not to notice them. So I knit the whole skirt, blocked it, which is the moment of truth. When you block lace, it really opens up and it really changes, I think more so than any other type of knitting. Yeah, and I'll put in some photos. And I was like, great, this looks good. It's the right size, it's long, it's billowy. I'm gonna keep going. And so I moved on to the center panel. I didn't change anything. This is called the fountain lace pattern. I didn't change anything except that I made it a little bit longer. The way that this dress is written, here, I'm gonna put these down. The way that this dress is written, the front is shorter and the back is longer, so there's a little bit of a train. I didn't want as much of a train, so I tried to make the front longer. I still kind of have a train, but it looks nice. And then I sewed these together, and the way that you sew them together is you pick up stitches and then you do a 3-needle bind off so that you're getting these lines that are quite similar to the horizontal lines from the tuck. I will say that this was my first of, I think, 2 very stressful moments. When I seamed them, there was like a lot of puckering and I got really worried, but then I blocked it again and it relaxed and the fabric looked nice and cohesive and I felt good. So the skirt was done. I started knitting the waistband and I actually went down to US size 1 needles for the waistband. And the reason that I did that is because I wanted it to be really structured and really tight, so that it would function like a belt, basically. I had to make it a little bit longer because of that, but I was measuring everything. It fit. I think I did 13 repeats of this dragon scale lace pattern, which I love. Probably my favorite lace from the whole piece. Then I knit the bodice. I changed the bodice. I did, instead of a scoop neck, I did kind of a classic V-neck. I think that Stephanie Close had written this to have a Gibson girl silhouette, which is not my exact style. And so I did a V-neck in the front, and I wrote my own instructions, and then I realized I could have used the instructions from the 2 back pieces because that's written to be a V. I did keep the shoulder pieces on hold. I didn't knit them because I wanted to put the whole dress together to see how long it would be and make sure I liked where the skirt fell before deciding how long I wanted the shoulders to be. And so those were on hold. Mattress stitched up the sides of the bodice and then started sewing the bodice and the skirt to the waistband. And again, for this part, you're picking up stitches and doing a 3-needle bind off. And I did that and I was like, looks good, tried it on, didn't fit, way too small. All of these pieces that had fit separately were way too small. I would say this was like the second time that I got really stressed. I was up till like 2 a.m. trying to block it and trying to fuss with it. And eventually what I did was I ripped it out and I Googled to see, is there something that's like a stretchy 3-needle bind off? And I was like, if I can't do the 3-needle bind off, I can always knit another tuck row, but this will be neater. I was like, I have all of these ideas for ways I can fix this. But what I found is that there is a combination of a 3-needle bind off and Jenny's surprisingly stretchy bind off, which I think people commonly use for like toe-up sock cuffs, for a surprisingly stretchy 3-needle bind off. And that's what I used and it worked. I will link to the instructions that I used if you are interested. I will say I don't think it's as tidy as a regular 3-needle bind off. So to me, right here, this line is a little messy and it works and it fit. So it preserved the stretchiness of all of the fabric. It didn't lock it into place. So it worked and I used it and I went with it. One other thing to say is that when it came to picking up stitches to do those 3-needle bind offs, I used an Andrea Mowry trick, which is that I place stitch markers evenly around to sort of track how many stitches I was picking up in each area, which is really helpful for a project like this because the circumference of the waistband is smaller than the circumference of the skirt. And I thought I was going to have to do some type of pleating, but because of the way that I did it, it kind of pleated itself and it just all worked, basically. So I did all of that, and then like 2 weeks before the wedding, I drafted the sleeves. The way that I drafted the sleeves is that I picked a lace pattern, which is one of the ones from the skirt. This is the open work leaf pattern. And I had to move because the light was shedding in my eyes. Let's see if this works. So I started to draft the sleeves and I picked this pattern, looked at the gauge. I used US size 3 8-inch circular. I used ChiaoGoo's for this whole thing because they're my favorite needle and what I have. I couldn't find my size US 2 8-inch circulars, so I just went with what I had. I took measurements of my wrist and my armpit circumference, like my arm near my armpit. I wrote the pattern and I just started knitting. And I quickly realized it would be too big. And so I had it and it was like pretty big. I think I may have blocked it just to double check. I pinched off the one that was too big, counted how many stitches I could take out, and then rewrote the pattern, knowing that it could be smaller with regular increases. And then I knit 2 sleeves. I blocked them halfway through a couple times just to make sure I liked how they were fitting. And then I wrote the sleeve cap by looking at some other sleeve caps and kind of just making up something where you you bind off, then you decrease, and then you bind off at the top. And I did have to do some ripping back on one of the sleeves because I started the sleeve cap too early and I really wanted the sleeve to come down to my wrist. And that was a little harrowing, but figured it out, didn't lose too many stitches. And eventually I was able to block the sleeves. I will say that after I blocked them, I realized that the sleeve cap part was a little too long, but this was like a couple days before the dress needed to be done, so I just sewed it up anyways, and it had a little bit of extra fabric, but it more or less worked. So that was most of the dress. I picked up stitches to finish the neck and the bottom of the skirt. I did a couple more blocks to make sure everything looked nice. Then I picked up stitches as written for the button band, and I used these lovely little buttons that I got at this shop called Gather Here, which is in Cambridge, Massachusetts. But I thought that they were beautiful and sort of vintage, and I sewed them in. And then I tried on the dress, and the dress itself fit, but the buttons kept popping out because the buttonholes were too big. So what I did was I took some white string and I sewed and I made every single buttonhole smaller. And then a couple nights before the wedding, I was like, Chris, help me try the dress on. And Chris was trying to put it on and was like, I cannot find the buttonholes. And I was like, crud. But day of the wedding, I had two of my friends who both knit and sew, help me and get ready, and they found the buttonholes, and Audrey helped pin me in. Audrey is one of my very, very dear closest friends. Audrey helped pin me in and I was ready. So that is, I think, unless I've forgotten something, how I made the dress. I worked on other projects a little bit during that time, but I didn't finish anything and I didn't push myself to finish anything. I did complete it 2 days before the wedding. So I will tell you now a little bit about the day of and wearing this, and I will share some photos. Yeah, it was October 6th. I did wear a slip under this dress. I posted some photos to Reddit, and a lot of people were worried that I had gone out in my underwear because there are some photos also of me wearing this where I'm in my underwear, which I don't think is that scandalous. It's like a bathing suit, but I guess some people were very concerned. I did wear a slip. I had my hair and my makeup professionally done by a very wonderful woman named Layla who came to my house. And then my brother drove me and Chris and Darwin to the bog, and then my brother hung out with Darwin because it is a conserved area and dogs aren't allowed. So yeah, I wore sneakers for the hike, and then Chris and I changed into our nice shoes for the boardwalk. I got this pair of shoes on The RealReal, which is designer consignment, and they are the brand Celine, and I got them for $100. I'm sure that they were like originally like $800 or something because it's kind of a fancy brand, but I thought that they were sort of cute and elven and went with my kind of like forest look. I think they're very cool. And I will definitely wear them again because they're beautiful shoes. So, you know, I didn't want like sandals. I had a hard time finding shoes. I probably could have done cowboy boots, but I ended up buying shoes like 2 days before we got married. Everything was a little last minute. So I didn't have time to find a great, not too expensive pair of cowboy boots. What else? Let me see. A few of my buttons actually did slip out while we were hiking, and Chris had to fix them, and that was okay. It was very sweet. You know, I think that the neckband ended up a little bit higher than I would have liked because I didn't let the sleeves down that low when I did sew them up. I think I may have missed mentioning that. I sewed the sleeves up. I made them as long as they need to be, and I sewed them up. I think the neckband could have been a little bit lower, but it also worked out, and maybe it was nice to have a modest neckband since this dress is completely sheer. One other thing I will mention is that it was about 70 degrees Fahrenheit when we got married. I thought it would have been a lot colder. The armpits definitely felt it. I was sweating. They felt it, which is totally fine because I don't know if I'll wear this again. So yeah, that is the dress. Overall, I would say I'm really satisfied, especially as we've gotten some photos back and I'm like, oh, I love this. I feel great about this project. I might have done a couple things differently. I might have changed some of the lace patterns to patterns that were a little bit more kind of like fairy tale, because that's what I really like. But I'm just proud that I did it. You know, not every detail is right. Like the middle doesn't line up exactly. There's some issues, but I feel really satisfied and proud overall. So I want to give you 5 tips if you want to knit your own garment like this. My first tip is to break it into parts and make a plan. I had in my head rough timing for which I wanted to be done with different sections. And well, some of you might be thinking, wow, you were done 2 days. That does not sound like good time management. I was glad that I was not finishing the night before. And, you know, with a project this big, it feels so much more manageable if you can break it into small parts. So even if you're doing something that's all one piece, try to think about what some of your guidelines are for when you want to be finished with things. The earlier you can start, the better. You know, especially with lace, I was worried that my body would change, but lace is so stretchy that it can really accommodate different bodies. And so I think it's better just to start earlier. Tip number 2, perfect is the enemy of done. I know that sometimes people say perfect is the enemy of good, and that's true, but this was one of the projects where if I ripped out every time I made a mistake, I never would have finished. And, you know, it's a homemade wedding dress. It looks like a homemade wedding dress. It doesn't look like a dress that someone bought in a store, and I think that's okay, especially because it was really just for us. It just needed to be done, and sometimes you just have to keep going and think, okay, I can fix this later if I really need to. Anything that happens, I can be resourceful and come up with a plan, but I just need to keep going. Tip number 3, take care of your body. I didn't do this. I actually really hurt my back working on this, especially towards the end. Right now I'm sitting and I feel okay, which is great, but I've had a back spasm since right before the week of the wedding. And I think part of that is that I worked a lot too and I have to sit for work. But I think hunching over, I don't think I stretched enough. There were times towards the end when I was feeling myself getting a little bit of carpal tunnel and I was able to stop and stretch, switch hands, switch needles, do whatever I needed to do. But especially if you're like me and you stress out about things, it's really important to take breaks, to stretch, and to take care of yourself. I'm still going to be taking care of myself and my back. I'm totally okay. It's not too serious, but it has been an issue that I basically hurt my back working on this, so a thing to think about. Number 4, measure and swatch frequently. I've started a couple of sweaters lately where I haven't swatched at all. It's whatever. I know for a lot of us, it's fun to just go into things. This is the type of thing where I think like, if you put this much effort into it, it's worth swatching to look at your fabric and just like measuring every time you block. When you block the lace, blocking it to measurements, like blocking with a ruler, just so you can make sure that it fits you the way that you want it to. I feel pretty good about the fit, I don't think it's perfect. I think it could have been looser in a few places. I think there's too much fabric on the arms. I could go into all of my criticism about it, but overall it did fit me and it fit my body pretty well, I think because I did measure so often and tried things on, took photos, was sort of continually assessing, blocking pretty frequently. So yeah, this is the type of project where swatch frequently. My last tip is to make sure that it's fun. I really enjoyed knitting this. I actually think I'm probably going to knit more lace now because I liked it so much. We watched The Sopranos while we knit it. We watched, what else? Some Great British Bake Off. I'm trying to think. Andor, which is a new Star Wars TV show. I spent a lot of time with Chris in the evenings working on it. It was really fun. I liked it. You know, I think some people would be like, why would you want to knit a wedding dress? And it's like, well, it's my hobby. It's not, I mean, I think I probably could have found a lovely dress in a store, but like, this was enjoyable. And I know some people are process knitters and some people are product knitters, but I think this is one where if you enjoy the process, it becomes so much more doable. There might be moments where you're really stressed out, but there are fixes for almost everything. And even if things aren't perfect, find a friend who will safety pin you in. I guess that's my sixth tip is find some supportive friends. I texted a lot of photos of this to my friends when I was in process. Big thank you. Shout out to all of my friends. I'm sorry for sending so many texts. So yeah, that is my dress. You might like it, you might not. Some people on Reddit were saying that they don't like hand-knitted wedding dresses, which is totally fine. I really liked it, which I think, you know, is the important thing. And I liked making it, and I loved hiking in it, and I loved marrying Chris wearing it. And it feels like, you know, especially because Chris was there for almost the entire making of this, it must have been hundreds and hundreds of hours. It feels like, you know, part of it is about how much time we spend together and how we encourage each other to do the things that we love. And I guess another big thank you to Christopher, who is always so supportive of anything I want to do, even if it doesn't make too much sense. So yeah, that is my wedding dress. I think what I will do is I will say, if you have questions about it, please post them below, and I will do my best to do a little bit of a Q&A in my next regular podcast, which I'm hoping to do in the next couple of weeks. We'll see, but especially since I now have a lot more time on my hands, I think that I'll be back to regular podcasts every 2 or 3 weeks. And if you have any questions about it, I would love to answer. So thank you so much for watching. Take care, and I will see you all very soon.